We are back. The lovely lady next to me is Raiza. Raiza, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, you are.
Raiza
Raiza
Khan.
Khan.
Raiza Khan. Raiza is from York University graduate, UW
Yes.
Cave Hill student, Master of Science in Counseling and Psychology, right? Or okay.
Yes, correct.
Mental health advocate, works in suicide prevention, sexual assault awareness. She's a global shaper, champion mental health awareness campaign. Currently resident assistant, Frank Worrell Hall. That's quite a tongue twister, Riza. Frank
Yes.
Worrell Hall, Cave Hill, working island wide IDB and Ministry of Education projects in schools.
Yes.
Riza uses social media to spark discussions on mental health and awareness. Awesome.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to ask you this question I asked Elsie.
Sure.
A similar question.
Okay.
When those close to you describe you, what do you usually agree with?
Oh, I always get passionate. A lot of passion, and I tend to get bubbly. My
Bubbly.
nickname when I was with Red Band-Aid Foundation was Bubbles. So yeah, those are and organized. Those
What,
are the three things that people usually tell me that I
I like
am.
that number three. What are three things you're passionate about?
Oh, for as long as I can remember, there's only really three things that I have ever kept an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was what I deem a silent advocate, I used to read in the newspaper since I was a little girl. Anything related to domestic violence, um, child abuse, and at that time, suicide, but more so now the overall spectrum of mental health and health in general, women's health especially.
What do you think as a child drew you to these social ills?
Sorry?
What do you think as a child? You said you read the papers as a child and you were always
Yes.
interested in mental health. Um, what do you think drew you to them?
Um, I'm not very certain what drew me into reading about these, what I deem quite grim
Mm-hmm.
things. I used to read a lot about what was going on in the courts with regards to domestic violence related issues and rapes and so on. That's always been something that is on in line of my line of view, my passion. I think that was primarily due to the fact that I remember being very young and thinking to myself, but who is helping these women? Why
Wow.
can't we protect these children? And what systems are they in place to either protect them or get justice for them? And I think, remember asking myself that as a child and not having an answer because, well, I was a child.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I think it was those constant questions that made me want to do something about it over time.
so curiosity drove you, and it still drives you to this day.
Yeah, I tend to I'm a random fact kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd be like, did you know? And so I think the curiosity element is there,
Mm-hmm.
but also just the genuine desire to be a part of a group of people who are going to make action happen and moving away from. I think we've come to a place in certain parts of the world where we have grown in terms of an understanding of um, mental health to some extent, suicide to some extent. Even things I was telling one of my clients this morning, I was at internship and we were having a discussion while we were doing a food event. And I said, we've come a long way from when we pretended or we didn't know about things and we just kind of brushed it under the rug. And I think there's a little bit more awareness now to um, being mindful of certain social issues that are happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, of course, we still have a long way to go, but I think we've still gotten a little bit better over the years.
What would you
Or I hope so.
What would you say are some social issues you that confronted you and gave you pause to question why is the status quo the way they are? As you grew and as you got into this mental health space,
Yes.
what are two things you would say really stuck out for you?
That race, sorry?
that really stuck out for you, that made you even more eager to get to the bottom of this?
Yeah. So one thing for sure is the stigma and a lot of the traditional views or religious views or social, cultural views that kind of form our opinion on what mental health is supposed to look like or what we should be doing or how we should be reacting to when someone comes out and says, I just something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was the human resource restriction that we have in Guyana. There just really is not enough practitioners, not enough qualified practitioners of mental health in Guyana. And so for me, that was definitely a moving force. When I decided to come to Barbados, it was because I wanted to at least try to be a part of the few people in Ghana who are qualified to be psychologists or to be practitioners in general,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're a psychiatrist, a clinical social worker, a psychologist. I just felt that we needed to start to bring about a little bit more awareness. And even I've spoken to PAHO about putting together a fund for this program so that even if we could send just one Guyanese once a year, have them apply, hope they get in, prime them to get in and prepare them for that. And just so that they can come back. And every year we just add on one more trained psychologist. That is one thing that I would like to see happen. And I couldn't see that and not do something about it.
This may be an unfair or silly question, but I have to ask it. And that is, after you complete your master's degree,
Sure.
um, you'll be able to uh, you'll be able to command a larger salary than you would probably get in Guyana. But why would you go back to Guyana?
Um, well, for one, I'll be honest, I'm not rushing back per se, just because there's a part of ethics. What psychology is grounded by is there's a list of ethics. You can Google it, the Code of Ethics for Psychologists. Not a lot of people know that. Um, and so what happens is within the Code of Ethics, we have to have we have to ensure that we're competent. So when I listen to that and when I understand that code of ethics, that guideline, I think, well, I need more experience. So my intention is not to rush back to Guyana and not be as fully prepared as I think that if I try to get some more experience within the Caribbean and beyond, then the more experience I can get, the better. So I know that there is the monetary element of psychology and the jobs and being paid and stuff like that in Guyana. But I'm hoping that once we can get people to understand that it's not a simple undergrad degree that you're getting to be a psychologist, because I think there is an assumption that that is what it is to be a psychologist, and that's not. And I speak about this often in my live streams on my Facebook. So I would try and get more people to understand that there's a lot more that goes into being a psychologist, and thus whatever government or private entity that's paying the psychologist that will be coming out and joining the cohort of these newly qualified psychologists, then maybe we can deal with the monetary aspect. But for now, I already kind of, I think as a child, I always kind of knew I would be in this field, and I would probably already knew I would be broke. So I tell myself that all the time. I was like, whether it was human rights, even if, and I always said, another thing that people told me I should go into is law. I said, but I wouldn't be a corporate lawyer anyway. I would probably be a human rights lawyer, an activist lawyer. And so I always kind of knew that money would hopefully not be a reason that drove me into the field I want to be in. But I'm hoping that with more awareness and more respect for the field of psychology, that eventually for future psychologists, we can, have a discussion on increasing the pay. But that's not the priority right now.
It really pleases my heart to hear young people like yourself speak the way you do. Um, but, but are you able to tell, you use social media a lot for your advocacy, your mental health advocacy. Are
Yes.
you able to tell if it's having an impact?
You see, It is. I would like to believe so
Hmm.
because I'd like to believe that I've spoken enough online that I have been chosen to speak here today. That's one thing. So I'm assuming the reach is getting somewhere. But as well, I think that social media is just the beginning.
Hmm.
There has to be a lot more grassroots work done. There needs to be a lot more um, awareness beyond just the social media platform. So I think yes, I think people online are getting it. They have access to more things like TED Talks and articles, and a lot of articles I put out are related to the topics I've already spoken about: mental health and women's rights and so on, and human rights. So I think social media is it's doing its job, but that's never where I end my advocacy at.
Hmm.
When Global Shapers, when I championed the Mental Health Yourself project, I was adamant about using radio and newspapers, and I was adamant about going to other regions, Region 2, that's where the project was hosted. And that was because at that point in time, Region 2, as well as Region 6, were having major issues, an influx of statistics reflecting that the suicide rate was definitely prominent in those regions. And that's why it had to be more than just the social media. You can never just stop at social media for advocacy because you're really not getting to the people who don't have internet, who live in riverine villages, who don't have electricity, who are not on social media. And those are the people who need just as much information and awareness and protection.
You,
So
you,
yeah.
you mentioned mental health yourself. What
Yeah.
are a few tips you can give about maintaining mental health?
I tell my residents, because like you mentioned, I'm a residence assistant here at Cave Hill. I used to be one in Toronto as well for 2.5 years. And like I would have mentioned to you all, that a lot of the things that I learned being an RA has formed a lot of my opinions of who I am as a woman, how I speak to people, the language I use, um, how I try to make people feel welcomed, especially if they're discriminated against based on their gender or sexual identity, these kinds of things. And so for me, um, when I tell my residents, especially because they're students, they're working, they have relationship problems, all these things that they come and speak to me about, I always promote self care. And self care is a spectrum of things that you can do. A lot of times, practitioners would tell you, doctors would tell you, exercise because of and I see you have Roshan coming on, and Roshan will be able to tell you, if you ask him about the medical reasons of why, exercise is good for the body and the brain, those happy hormones. And so things like exercising and um, there's art therapy, there's journaling. A lot of persons have so much going on inside of them and you don't ever know. You look at someone and they look happy and normal.
Hmm.
I hate to use that word, normal. And so you don't know what's going on. So if I tell my clients all the time, do you journal? And they said, yeah, I like to write. And, anything, journaling, poetry, art therapy, exercising, spending time with family and friends. Some people find a lot of strength in religious going to their church and so on. When we did mental health yourself, there was an element of that I presented on for coping mechanisms after we did the suicide element. On the second day, we did coping mechanisms because I believe that you can't give people information and not give them tools. And so I brainstormed in this group, 40 odd people in Anna Regina, and they said, there's things like cricket and fishing and farming and spending time with family and camping. But the concern that Region 2 mentioned to us was the ever annoying presence of alcohol in many of these events.
Mm.
And so it no longer becomes self caring or it moves from being a family oriented thing and it changes when you add in that kind of thing. But I would tell people self care is so important. Look for things that you really feel happy doing. You're proud to say that you do it, you enjoy it. It creates a um, feeling of like a pleasant feeling. And like I said to one of my clients yesterday, I said, you know, find that little piece of the puzzle that fits back, that makes you feel whole, and so if you take the time to really think about what makes you happy, um, then I would suggest that you try and do it even in the smallest amounts on a consistent basis.
When are you most happy?
What do I want? Sorry.
When are you most happy, Raiza?
This. um, Even though I'm nervous and stuff like that,
Oh, don't be. You're fine.
But you get butterflies. The things, somebody said to me, I told a friend I'm nervous about today, and they're like, you know what, being nervous is a good thing, Rise. It means you care.
Yeah.
It means it excites you and at the same time scares you. But for me also, my self-care a lot of times is, it used to be dancing, and I used to be a dancer, and so I enjoy dancing, but I've gotten into this semester.
Right, so hold on a second. Can you tilt your screen backwards a little? I just want to put some space. Yeah, good. That's awesome.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
That's all right.
And so I've gotten into this semester, since I've moved to UE formally. I have gotten into planting. Oh. So I'm planting aloe and ginger and turmeric and mint and garlic and all these things. And I planted some flowers, and then the weeder man came and cut it yesterday. Oh no! So I was devastated. It was a big ruckus.
do you plan to sell your crop, your produce?
Oh, I will give it away when I'm leaving, when my 10 months is over here as a residence assistant and my internship is done. I've already promised a bunch of aloe plants and sunflowers and chrysanthemums to my residents. So I tell them, take it. It's free. You're students. We're all students.
What is a typical mental health situation you find on campus?
Oh, okay. So yesterday I had a suicide attempt. Oh. And another very common thing is people who date people within their residence, and then it goes sour. And you have to see that person, and it sometimes creates a lot of anxiety. I have a client who is very paranoid of their former partner because it did not end well at all. And there's only so much I can do. So those are two very common situations. And I mean, those are things that I saw even as a resident assistant in Toronto, even with all the resources and the on-campus counseling and those kinds of things, and all the psychologists on York University's campus. I still would get calls. My first call, emergency crisis call that I got about a month into being a residence assistant for the first time years ago, was a suicide attempt. It was one of my residents who called to speak with me to say, I need your help, you need to come. So yeah, and that's where the training becomes really important.
How do you deal with that afterwards? How do you process or get back to a space of, I'm going to use that word we don't like, normalcy?
Normalcy.
Yes, after hearing.
For me, the therapist?
Yes.
I think after a while, what I've done is, when I was an RA, my first 2 years, I would tell myself, I would put on my jacket, my RA jacket, and I would go into residence assistant mode. Okay. And I do the same thing when I step into my internship every day. I go into therapist mode. And when I step back in my house, I go back to being Raiza. Yes, there's going to be times when things linger, and sometimes they need to linger so you can process what you just went through, or what you just helped someone through. But I try to disconnect. And that is something, as a fresh psychologist, you have to learn to do. And you have to learn to do without, I've seen psychologists cope with their daily problems with drinking. That's not really helpful. You have to find a way to cognitively and emotionally deal with what you're helping people through in a healthy way, because then you can become a victim yourself. You will need therapy yourself. And the hardest people to do therapy with are usually the psychologists, social workers.
Because they know all the little tricks.
Oh, we know what you're fishing for, because this program, actually, this is why this program is so important to the Caribbean, the one I'm in right now.
You're talking about, is this the IDB program? Is this the IDB and is this the IDB and Ministry of Education program?
No, this is like my actual like counseling
Okay.
psychology, my master's. This program is so important to the Caribbean because, for example, I have to sit in minimum of 12 therapy sessions as the client before I'm even allowed to go into internship because my coordinator, absolutely former, recently former coordinator, absolutely amazing woman, phenomenal, fully accomplished. She set up the program in such a way that, again, our oath as psychologists we take, the same thing with medical doctors, is firstly, do no harm. And so, if you are not aware of your biases, if you're not aware of your own traumas, if you haven't dealt with your own past, you can't help your client. And so, I had to sit in 12 odd therapy sessions. And I knew when my therapist was probing for certain things, and I'd be like, okay, Raiza, either you can fight it and say that you weren't open to therapy, or you can admit to what you've been through, and you can get through it. But I knew the tricks that she was doing half the time. But you can't fight it. If you're going to be a therapist and a practitioner, you have to deal with your past.
I asked you about the IDB and Ministry of Education
Yes.
project. Um, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's actually a program that I've approached my chief enumerator. I was an enumerator. Basically, what that means is I go into a selected school or selected schools that the program is being run on. In Barbados, it's being run in 9 schools. The program is called Aganar. And basically, we go into the schools, and the schools select the children who are having the most challenges, whether academically, behavioral, and we do testing. And so we do these psychometric testing. So what they call in the psychology field psychometric testing. So we look at intelligence testing, like the SATs is considered a psychometric test, those kinds of things. And so I conduct these tests on students, and then I enter their data, and then I analyze their data. And so I was basically the assistant to the chief enumerator, and so I was overseeing the double entry and the data analyst. And so I remember mentioning it to the IDB, not the IDB representative, sorry, the persons who put together the program. I said, this is something that I think Guyana would benefit. Is that something that we're looking to expand to Guyana? Because they tried it in Belize and Jamaica before. They've been trying it in Barbados for the past few years. And so there might be a possibility that maybe in a few years we can have the same program duplicated in Guyana.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What frustrates you the most what frustrates you the most about the mental health profession?
Do we have time?
No, we don't. Actually, we have
just on the downfalls. I tell people this: I am not a blindly anything person. I am not blindly political. I am not blindly Guyanese. I am not blind to the downfalls of even my university here at Cave Hill. And so I have no problems observing, analyzing, and making an assumption, having my opinion on what happens and what upsets me. But particularly, again, what frustrates me is the human resource issue we have regarding mental health. And I keep saying this. Everyone who knows me knows that I have a problem with the amount of practitioners and the support that we need more support behind getting funding to have students come and do this program. That is just what it is. And we need the government to make mental health a priority. Yes, we have a budget, but what are we doing with the budget? And we need, a lot of NGO people have said this, we're done with the talk shops. We're done with those. We need to make movements. And what I would ask people to keep requesting, both government and non-governmental organizations, is bring in the specialists, do training, not just one-off training. And I tell people, mental health yourself was not a training workshop. It was an awareness workshop, because I would never do a one-day training, because that's not really training. And you're not really, unless you're really looking at like the creme de la creme of practitioners or future practitioners, and the material is saying they already know, and you're fast forwarding through like a 3-week program in a weekend or a 4-day program, then maybe, but you can't ask the general public to be gatekeepers off of a training of 4 hours.
Right, so we gotta leave it there. I am so sorry that we gotta cut
It's
us off. This is
okay.
just not enough time. So,
I
you
know.
know, I gotta get you back at some point. We'll
Sure.
definitely be in touch so we can talk some more. But thank you
Great.
so much.
I hope I answered all of your queries and
Oh, yes, you
questions.
did. Yes, you did.
Okay.
All right, take care.
Thank you,
You're
Selwyn.
welcome. Bye
Have a
bye.
good show.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye. Take care.
Very nicely done.